Before we get started our interview with Roy Philpott, I want to talk to you about a couple sponsors that make the Orange Crush podcast possible. First, I want to thank Herb Tyler and Clemson and Seneca Chick-fil-A. If you want to be the king of tailgating for the Stanford matchup, you got all day to eat some chicken nuggets. Why not order that and some chicken biscuits over at Chick-fil-A? We also want to thank Lisa Nason and Nason Accounting for their sponsorship. They help make the Orange Crush podcast what it is. Now, let's get to Roy. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Orange Crush podcast. It's David Hood alongside myself, Grayson Mann. And today we have Roy Philpott from ESPN, play-by-play announcer since 2013, also a Clemson alum. I don't think we talked about this beforehand. Never thought we'd have a game where Stanford, of all teams, would be playing a conference game where the fate of Charlotte plays into everything with this. So, Roy, how you doing, man? Thanks for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Grayson, David, it's great to see you guys. It's good to see you got a podcast going and bringing in guests and talking a little college football. Is the wildest season I think is already underway that I can remember. Just with some of the upsets and the craziness I think that is to come in the following weeks, where everybody's aiming for the 12-team playoff. And who knows? I mean, who knows how it's all going to shake out? But I can sense it. And I think coaches can sense it, players can sense it, media members. The next couple of weeks, as we get closer to December 20th and those first playoff games on campus, there's unexpected twists and turns coming, in my opinion. So yeah, doing well. Good to be with you guys, and a good time to have me on,
And it was a little bit wild for you this past weekend in the middle of a renovation Doak Campbell Stadium. You've got 0-3 Florida State against 3-0 Cal. Cal comes out, they kind of have an early lead. Florida State gets the lead back to start the second half, and then a couple of missed field goals and a late drive is stopped by the state defense or by the FSU defense. What's it like saying, hey, welcome to the ACC now?
man. We had a Zoom call with Justin Wilcox, who I've had Cal before. It's been a couple of years, and he's grown up a lot, matured a lot in that role as a head coach, and has done a really nice job. But in our Zoom call, as we got started, I said, "Welcome to the ACC." And like I wasn't planning on that; it's just what came out, and they were super excited to get an invitation to the Atlantic Coast Conference because they didn't want to be Washington State or Oregon State and whatever was left over from the Pac-12. Now that league may have new life, and if they do, that's fantastic. But they had a sense of gratitude, and yeah, it was different. It's strange. They've made two cross country trips already. One was good at Auburn, the other not good. Obviously, this weekend in Tallahassee, and it felt a little surreal at times. But they've acclimated themselves very well. I would tell you, David, because they've got a great defense, they got a quarterback, they're well coached, they've got a brand, in my opinion, and they're not going to be an easy out for anybody. And Miami goes there after an open date October 5th. They better bring their A game, or they're going to leave Berkeley with a loss. So yeah, it was a lot to digest. It was a weird game, 14-9. You don't get a lot of games that are that low scoring. But we kind of thought that, going in, that it wasn't going to be a high scoring affair. Maybe 20 points would win it. And lo and behold, that's what happened. And Florida State had just enough defense in that fourth quarter to hold on and to find a way to get a win.
And conversely, on the other side, we talk about strange new places. We also have a new face with quarterback DJ Uyunglele, where you're familiar with playing at Clemson and Oregon State, and now they're trying to figure it out in Tallahassee. Just what do you think a win for them last Saturday can do to sort of maybe not save the season in the sense of get back to where their intended goals were, but I think at this point it's about confidence and saying, hey, this is a locker room that believes in Norvell. It's been an uphill climb, even it feels like from the beginning in Dublin.
Yeah, I don't know that it turns their season around, but they had to start somewhere. I don't love their matchup this weekend at SMU because we just saw SMU pour in 66 points against TCU. Not that they'll do that against Florida State's defense. Like Florida State is interesting. They do have NFL talent in pockets, in critical pockets, especially on defense. You can see it. We watched it at their practices last week. It's there. But in terms of connectivity, especially on offense, it doesn't seem to be there. So they still have a lot to figure out. To me, a big part would be Toafili, Cam Davis, getting the run game going. They entered that game Saturday night only 52 yards on the ground per game. They doubled that by halftime against a good Cal defense. But, Uyunglele was uneven. He threw the interception near the red zone. I don't know how they just right the ship on offense right away because their weapons from last year aren't there, and it's obvious. Are they good in some spots? They are. Are they better than what they've shown? I believe so. Is that enough this weekend at SMU and then the following week against Clemson? They're going to have to play much better, especially on offense, to win either one of those games. It's not impossible, but I don't know that it's probable at this point. So, I'm really curious. SMU's opener in the ACC in Highland Park there in Dallas Saturday night in primetime. Like, what does that even look like? I have no idea, but I definitely want to watch to see what it feels like at the end.
Well, speaking of primetime, Clemson hosts Stanford. And speaking of primetime part two, the Clemson offense, where has that been? Have you been able to take a look at this? And that's the question I get is what has changed? What is different? And I could probably give people 10 different answers, but just for you, what do you think has changed?
The last, what is it, 3 games, 2 games, I guess. Cade Klubnik has a pocket, and he has the ability to go through his progressions and have a chance to look downfield. So, to me, the easy answer to your question, Dave, would be Matt Luke and having him. And I think the offensive line, to me, looks drastically different compared to what it did a year ago. And look, part of me is taking the Georgia game and shoving that to the side. I didn't see very much of that game because we were working at the time, the Virginia Tech Vanderbilt game, and I haven't gone back and watched it or anything like that. But I saw enough of the cut ups, and it was Georgia being Georgia right out of the gate, and Clemson still carrying over some leftovers from last year and take nothing away from UGA in that regard. But since then, against teams that aren't as good as UGA, they've looked different. And the fact that it's so stark to me would be the one encouraging sign that Klubnik has that extra half second to get rid of the ball. And when he's been given that, he's taken advantage. And in doing so, his confidence level, you can feel it, has soared. And so, all of those things are things, I think if you're the average Clemson fan, you haven't seen that in probably 4 years. I mean, it's been a minute. 2021 was very uneven. 2022 maybe, got a little bit better at times. And you're a play away against South Carolina, maybe from going to the playoff. But an offense that puts up half a hundy and a half, basically in two games against App State and NC State, are not terrible teams. To me, indicates there's the idea that this thing could be vastly different on that side. So I would start with the offensive line and bringing in Coach Luke. That seems to have made a big time difference. You can feel their confidence. Brian Wesco, TJ Moore, I think those boxes are also checked more at wide receiver. That would get me excited if I'm a Clemson fan right now to think that, okay, this thing, we'll see in the coming weeks and what happens, even this weekend against Stanford, a team that's probably going to put up some points. But surprisingly, the ship kind of righted itself post UGA. If you just eliminate that one half against the Dogs, maybe the narrative is even vastly different than what I'm suggesting. And I don't know that it's written in stone yet, but I think if you're a Clemson fan, you like the direction you've seen the last 8 quarters.
Right. When you mentioned about that UGA game, we talked to Tristan Lee on the Tuesday after that, and he said, I'm more confident watching the film than I was beforehand. And you're scratching your head probably on the outside going, well, you only scored 3 points. So I don't know where that confidence is coming from for them to then go there in that third play of Wesco for the touchdown against App State. It just felt like this release from the offense, especially Cade Klubnik, of just finally, we've been saying it for months, it feels like, and now they're just seeing the results play out on the field. And for me, it's that togetherness. And we've talked about it with Tom Luganbill and just sort of the way Clemson constructs this roster is that I'm not sure a transfer portal roster would have survived something like that against UGA. There's some core leadership, and sure, there's points here and there about where talent needs to be, but it feels like this team had an identity early and a lot of leaders to look to. How important do you feel like that is? So maybe you can definitely push back if you disagree with me there, but just how have you seen this Clemson team sort of respond when I've seen teams like Florida State, big portal team, Colorado, big portal team, Ole Miss in certain spots hasn't necessarily lived up to their expectations per se. Just maybe I'm putting you in a trap answer here with the portal, but I'd just love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ole Miss is really good, and
Yes,
I think
this year,
they've
yes.
proved that over the course of this season. So I don't know that I would group them into that category, but what you mentioned with Florida State, I don't know how connected they are in terms of leadership, but it's more that they just lost, playmakers. And then internally on a team, um, that connectivity in football to me means a little bit more than other sports because you're leaning on guys and they're leaning on you and you have to do your job. And if you don't, and somebody else tries to do your job, inevitably it becomes catastrophic. So, no, yeah, the connectivity I think is there. I think if you're an average fan, I'll go back to the offensive line. You want to see that cohesion in place. It hasn't been there in, maybe since 2020. The last two games, suddenly it feels like it's there. And there were even moments in that Georgia game, just based off some of the coaches I've talked to around the league and in other spots in the country, where they felt like that, okay, I know what that score says. You always got to be careful suggesting something like this in a blowout. But if you go back and watch, there were components where the O line, showed that cohesion in a different way compared to maybe teams in recent years. So I think that's significant. The portal era in general is about the acquisition of talent. If you've got better talent, then you're going to be able to overcome some of the issues and lack of leadership. But when you face adversity for the first time, that's when that area becomes tested a little bit more. So, look, there's more than one way to win right now in college football. Long term, Dabo's way may not be the worst way, despite what people felt after the Georgia game, because he's always looking long term and he's growing his guys up, graduating players, and there's something to that. But in a circumstance where you need to fill a hole, get a little bit better at one position, build some depth, you've got an issue somewhere, is the portal a bad place to try to address that? I don't think so. And in certain circumstances, like Florida State a year ago, man, they all chips, middle of the table. Here we go. Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Tatum Bethune, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse. And some of those guys had been there more than just 1 year, but they got them out of the portal. Um, it worked out well too. So you can do it multiple ways. Maybe somewhere in the middle is the best. But the cohesion, to answer your question, long winded, definitely matters, Grayson, for sure.
So this Saturday, prime time in Death Valley, Grayson and I just got off the phone with Troy Taylor and a couple of Vanderbilt players. And Troy Taylor, yeah, I watched them against Syracuse. Really impressed with what they were able to do on the road in whatever you want to call that dome, whatever it's being called this week. But he takes pride in the fact that they're not the most talented team on the field. They won't be the most talented team on the field Saturday night. He knows that. But they take pride on being very well coached, on being physical at the point of attack. I was talking to their tight end Sam Roush about it, and I said, "You guys didn't panic when it was late," and he was like, "We just have that confidence." So this is kind of a different Florida State team, and excuse me, Stanford team. What they remind me of in some ways are the Boston College teams that Clemson has played in the past. Well coached, quarterback that's going to get the ball out, throw to the tight end, got one good receiver. Maybe you could say Pitt under Narduzzi to start with, somewhere in there. But that's kind of what they remind me of.
I like that. I'll listen to it. Ashton Daniels is a good player. They went on the road
Really
all
good
the way
player.
across the country, 2,800 miles, whatever the number was, and won at the JMA Wireless Dome and looked good in doing it. I mean, they jumped out to a lead. Daniels was playing well. Defense gets a big turnover in the second half. That was instrumental. I watched all that game. But to your point, Troy Taylor, the job he did before he got to Stanford out there on the West Coast, I believe it was Sacramento State, like he has a brand and an offensive strategy that he kind of wants to do, that he is very comfortable with, and a long track record of success. So I think you look for that when you're trying to rebuild a program like Stanford because they weren't very good at the end of the David Shaw era. And I think even by his own admission, like it just kind of run its course. I like the comparison to BC. I don't know that they're as physical as some of BC's classic teams, but yeah, it adds up. To me, I look at them, they're not a team that's going to beat themselves. They're now used to traveling across the country and finding a way. So it's a good test. Hey, look, it's reminiscent of what the '86 Gator Bowl between these two. That's the last time they played. It's one of my first memories of college football. Rodney Williams down there in Jacksonville, and it was a crazy
John
game. I
Mustard.
believe. Yeah, there you go. They got out to a big lead and then held on late. And who would have thought, 30 something years later that they would be playing within the ACC? But coach is solid. Stanford's solid. You watch the TCU game in that first one. They were very competitive there. I think they're a lot better though from week 1 to 3, and so that to me would be what makes this game interesting coming up Saturday night.
One of the more fascinating things, I think you can attest to this, having to do the prep for the California games that you called, but the cross country mileage. David, you had the number, you said it on the Zoom call. Just what was that number of how many miles they're going to have to travel in just this 2 week span?
Well over 10,000 in
Yes.
September.
So going into like something like that where you're losing a lot of sleep, you're traveling a lot of miles, it feels like it has to wear on you at some point, even if it's just in back-to-back weeks. Did the Cal players or even the head coach address sort of the strategy behind that, and what can we maybe expect from Stanford to sort of model that coming to Syracuse and then Clemson, South Carolina in just the snap of a finger, it feels like.
Yeah, both programs, I believe, go across the country 4 times. I think that's right during football season. The Cal approach was we're going to get there a day earlier than what we normally do. So for their Saturday night game in Tallahassee, they arrived on Thursday, and Justin Wilcox made it a contest at the end of their practice on Thursday morning. How quick can we get in the air after practice? And literally, it's like this festival to figure out who can get there the fastest and how quickly we can get off the ground. And then he utilizes that extra time and promotes it as more time together as a team. And so he basically said, we've made it not a big deal. We've embraced it. It worked for their Auburn game. Look, they played well, especially on defense in Tallahassee Saturday night. And Florida State's defense is pretty good. They had something to say about what Cal was not able to do offensively. But they've just embraced it. So I'm sure Stanford is operating under a similar procedure. Olympic sports and how that works out, in basketball, other sports, I'm not smart enough to tell you. Maybe it's more of a logistical, hurdle for those teams to get over. And then the same thing for the teams going east to west. It's something to certainly consider. But from what I've heard so far, the coaches are embracing this. And again, the gratitude of we're in a league. We're not Oregon State. We're not Washington State. They have a seat at the college football playoff table. That has not gone lost on anyone. They know if they win the ACC, whether it's this year, next year, in 2035, that they get to go. They're appreciative of that. So, like, that may be one of the differences, okay, we have to go a long ways. We have to do it a bunch of times in a season, but it certainly is better than the alternative. And the bright side of it is we get to spend more time together, make it fun, and we'll find our creative balance in how to make it all work. Cal had to fly right home right after the game. They were supposed to land around 2 a.m. Pacific Coast time there. So, like, the recovery is certainly not going to be easy. But they've addressed it, and they feel like that they've got a decent handle on it. But, yeah, I mean, you guys can't tell me at some point it doesn't become a factor. 4 games in, and you've done that, and you're sitting there in mid-November. You better find a way to get refreshed and rejuvenated for that stretch run at the end of the season.
I did ask Stanford coach Troy Taylor about that, and kind of an interesting point. He said that they thought about staying on the East Coast, but Stanford starts school this week.
Feels a little
a
late.
month later than Clemson, but they start school this week. He said he thought it was important that all their players were there to start school. They're flying out here Thursday, and then his deal was we want them to go to bed, somewhere around midnight Eastern Standard Time. We want to keep them on Pacific Standard Time. Then they're going to get them up Friday, somewhere around Pacific Standard Time. They want to keep them on that time. And they're going to take them to a local high school and do a walkthrough and kind of a workout, get their legs under them, and then prepare to play what he called a 4 o'clock game on Saturday for what will be a 4 o'clock game for them, and then fly them home right after the game. It just seems difficult. It does, but they've already done it once.
Yeah, and to me, it's the accumulation of all of that. When you're on trip number 4, maybe you're sitting there with a 500 record or a game or two below 500. And who knows? At that point, you're going to have to psychologically do some things to crispen things up. And to me, that's where there's a larger impact. Getting up for a night game in Death Valley right after you upset Syracuse on the road, everybody's going to be jacked up. After that, later in the season, how does the toll of all of those travels, kind of make an impact? We'll see.
Yeah, and having they talk also about the experience of being able to play in Clemson for the first time. It's sort of what Dabo Sweeney talked about today as well, is that this is just what the fun of college football is now, is that you think teams you never thought that you'd be able to play. Now you're lining it up on the schedule. Clemson will probably travel to Stanford and Cal down the road, pending conference stuff. It's always outgoing, realigning. But the fascinating part of this, Roy, is that we get new matchups, new teams. When you look at this Clemson Stanford matchup, I don't know how much you've potentially been able to look into it, but what do you see as sort of the key for Clemson to just continue this rolling? The way I've seen the last two games for Clemson is it's teams that are perceived as inferior to them, and they're not shooting themselves in the foot or getting pantsed like they did in 2023. It's they're going out there and shutting these teams' flames out pretty quickly. And I'm pretty impressed so far from what I've seen in this bounce back from the UGA game.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rocket science. I would simply say the big plays on offense, the big plays from the quarterback position. I mean, I would like to see Klubnik, step through some of those throws, command the pocket with even more of a presence. It's hard to really nitpick anything that's happened in the last 8 quarters, but just continuing to build on that. No step backwards. And I think that's what we've seen in previous years where one series, okay, he drops a dime in, touchdown, next series runs for a touchdown. And then all of a sudden a quarter goes by and there's, turnover on downs, interception, fumble. And then you're sitting there in the third quarter. Why is it 21-13 when this game should be over? That's what I think you want to look for Saturday night. I believe the point spread's about 3 touchdowns. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but you want to be in a position where Klubnik is simply building and stacking great games on top of great games, because then that's going to matter when you play Louisville, when you play Pitt, maybe when you play South Carolina, if you're lucky enough to get the ACC championship game, which I think is in the wheelhouse, potentially Miami in a game like that, you're going to have to be firing on all cylinders to beat those teams. I've seen Pittsburgh, Eli Holstein, that team is capable of scoring 50 any game the rest of the year with Des Reed and how fast they go with Cade Bell, their new offensive coordinator. Louisville, you know what they bring to the table with Coach Brom, and Tyler Shuck is there. They've got a brand in place. They're going to be tough. They'll be tough against Notre Dame this weekend, I would argue, and then Miami potentially and Cam Ward down the line. You want to have all of your ducks in a row long before those games, so that when you step on the field, it reminds you of what 2020 was or 2018 was, where all right, I feel like this offense is going to be able to score at will if necessary. So, I mean, I would start there, and it starts with Cade Klubnik, growing up the young receivers, Maffa, Haynes, and the ground game, and all those good things, and then the depth on defense. I mean, I think it's easy to see they've been able to slam the door shut for the most part in the first 2 quarters of these last 2 games. And then all of a sudden you look at the scoreboard and like, how did they give up 30? So there's some components there where maybe the foot has been taken off the gas with some of the reserves. And part of me would tell you that that's somewhat understandable with a team that's playing some younger dudes and maybe missing Peter Woods at times. So, but yeah, I think Coach Sweeney would love to clean that up, and for Wes Goodwin, love to clean that up, and you would feel better. But it's good now, and it may be good after this weekend against Stanford. The teams that I mentioned are the ones that stick out like a sore thumb. Pitt, Louisville, potentially an ACC championship game. You're not going to be able to do what you've done already and think that you're going to be good enough to go to the playoff. You got to continue to stack and continue to build confidence, especially at quarterback.
All right, as we wrap this up, and again, we appreciate you being with us. You've got Navy this week. I saw a great tweet, I guess it was yesterday, talking about Navy being undefeated, Army undefeated, saying last time Army and Navy were undefeated at this point in the year was in 1945, when they had roamed through Europe and the South Pacific there in World War II. Much fun is it? Kenny Amatalolo, he's now out there on the West Coast. They've had to make a change. What do you see about Navy? What can we look forward to from Roy Philpott and the call this week?
Well, I have a great relationship with Brian Newberry, their head coach, and he was a defensive coach at the Naval Academy before Ken Niumatalolo and Navy parted ways. He's now at San Jose State, like you mentioned. Great dude, but I have a deep respect for their program for all the reasons you would expect. And Coach Newberry has really done a transformation. So, like the story there is, Navy runs an offense that basically is the millennial version of the wing T. And it originates with Drew Cronick, their offensive coordinator, who last year was the head coach at Mercer, whose father was a longtime high school coach in the state of Georgia. And it all just kind of started from there. They've taken it to Annapolis. And in 3 games, they've scored more points at Navy than they've scored in any 3 games since 1918. It's been very tough to stop. And their quarterback, Horvath, has been sensational. They're coming off a win against Memphis. Memphis, the same team that was projected by many to go to the college football playoff, representing the group of five after beating Florida State the previous weekend. That Memphis defense held FSU to 12 points. They held Navy to 56. That just speaks to what Navy's offense is all about. So, yeah,
And their
I was
offensive
getting
line coach is Jay Guillermo, Clemson
and I just
national
realized
champion.
that last night. Yeah, I didn't know that, but you're 100% right. It's his first year there. And obviously he's made a nice impact. So, like, to me, the story is their offense and what they've been able to do. And look, if you're undefeated right now in college football in the group of five, you're in the conversation because of the new 12-team playoff. So this is part of the adjustment for all of us. Navy has a schedule that is not impossible down the stretch. They play a bunch of games away from Annapolis. Commanders in Chief Trophy, obviously, you understand, with Air Force and Army at the very end. But when you're in a position, you enter October and you're undefeated, man, you've got a great chance. Think about that. I mean, how great would it be if one of the service academies played in the playoff? And then how difficult of a matchup would that be? Conceivably, 5 versus 12 game, where you had Army, Navy, Air Force playing wherever, Notre Dame or whatever team you want, with all that's on the line. And so that's just a small little slice of what this new playoff is going to be about. And if it's not one of the service academies, chances are it'll be a group of five school like Boise State, who took Oregon to the wire, Memphis, who already beat Florida State, or whomever. I can't wait for that because there's going to be upsets. There's going to be March Madness type moments in December. Nobody's thinking about that right now, but it's coming. I think it happens in year one. The question is, where does it fall in line? And, we'll have to wait and see. But, yeah, Navy is always a good get. And, man, it just feels different talking to their players and coaches. And you feel it the second you get assigned that game that these guys are going to be on the front lines at some point and have been in some circumstances already. And it's deeper. It's more loyalty. It's everything that a lot of people wish college football and college sports was still about. It's still there at the academies.
Yeah, and you look at their schedule, Roy, and it's home. The toughest remaining game is Notre Dame, and they get that at home. So you never know. You never know what could happen. That'd be a fun
I
playoff
think that
game
game
for
may actually
5-12.
be in Yankee Stadium.
Oh
It's either in
wow.
Yankee Stadium or in MetLife Stadium. I forget which one.
Oh, that's
No,
probably
Notre
true.
Dame doesn't want any piece of what Navy's offense just put on Memphis. Just we'll see what happens in that game, but good luck to the Golden Domers. They're going to be tested against the Millennial Wing team.
And we thought NIU was going to be that group of five lock after they beat Notre Dame. So anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And come playoff time, we're going to see even more of that kind of chaos, in my opinion.
Lovely for the having the chaos. But Roy, if Navy makes the playoff, we may have to get you back on to be able to claim your
Hey,
your take. Could have
I
it.
don't know that Navy goes to the playoff, but the longer you're in the mix as that undefeated team in the group of five, you've got a chance. And the AAC has been the conference that sent the majority of teams to the old New Year's Six bowl games the last couple of years, and they've won games there too. Different story in the playoff. I would just love to see, a service academy, a triple option wing T offense come
Oh
playoff
yeah,
time. It's just, yeah,
that'd be
go
fun.
deal with that. You figure it out. That headaches everywhere, and it would be must see TV in my opinion.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, a Sorry, someone just walked into the house. Roy, before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts?
No, it's always good to talk to folks. Around Tiger Town. That's where I got my start in broadcasting and writing and radio, TV, all those things. So yeah, I appreciate the invitation. Good luck to you guys. And like I said, I think the chaos is coming, and in many ways that could help Clemson. In some ways, maybe it doesn't down the stretch. But all you have to do is win your league, and that gets you a ticket at the dance and a first round bye, which is pretty critical. So it's weird. You could actually drop a game in the ACC, find a way to come back and play in the championship game, and it doesn't matter. So stranger things have happened, and like I said, good to be with you guys, and yeah, hopefully we're talking again with much more to talk about from playoff time.
Absolutely. And you guys can check out Roy's broadcast. It's going to be Navy and UAB. Roy, where can we find that? ESPN kickoff time?
E2, ESPN2 at noon Eastern and 11 Central. And then I think the week after, we're back in the ACC, either at Louisville or at North Carolina. We'll find that out on Sunday. So, but yeah, it's check us out noon ESPN2 on Saturday.
All right. So you guys know where to switch your tailgate satellites to. And waiting for the Clemson Stanford matchup, guys, was Grayson Mann alongside David Hood with special guest Roy Philpott. Thank you guys for tuning in. Subscribe to TigerNet for more and be on the lookout for more Stanford coverage. Take care and have a great day.